Good afternoon. I am Nury Turkel, a senior fellow here at the Hudson Institute. Thank you for joining me today for this timely conversation. Around the world, autocracy is rearing its head in new and diverse forms. Authoritarian governments, disinformation campaigns, and human rights abuses are all joining forces to weaken democratic norms and squash human rights and civil liberties around the world. We're living in time necessitating confronting the reality of growing authoritarianism around the world, in particular a powerful challenger to the democratic order. Primary offender of undermining human rights is the Chinese Communist regime. Most egregious example of such an assault can be found in the case of the ongoing Uyghur genocide. I'm delighted to host a special guest, Bernard-Henri Lévy, for discussion on human mandate to confront the atrocities unfolding around the world and what governments can do to prevent human rights and protect human rights and democratic values. In his work as a philosopher, journalist, filmmaker, and public intellectual, Bernard has been engaged with the worst human rights crisis, those often overlooked by the international community. His argument in favor of humanitarian intervention are particularly relevant at this volatile time. Bernard, thank you so much. What an honor to welcome you back to the Hudson Institute. If I may start with this practical question. You call yourself an American by spirit. Can you elaborate on your views of the role of American democracy, particularly in light of the assaults on human rights and democratic principles being carried out by actors such as the Chinese Communist regime?
America is the core of democratic values in the world. America is the fatherland of democracy. America is entitled to consider itself as a shining city upon the hill. America, even when it is unfaithful to its own creed, even when it turns its back against its own principles, remains obscurely faithful to this DNA. Despite administration, despite public opinion, despite voters sometimes, there is a genius of great nations which is more important than any circumstance, and that in this case make America a sort of vivid flame. I'm so surprised when I travel a lot and not in the most hospitable places in the world, as you know.
Yeah.
I went to Darfur at the darkest time. I went in Rwanda at the darkest time. I went recently in Syria. I went in Afghanistan just before the Taliban. I went in Nigeria. All that. I am always so surprised to see how in the midst of the night, the American creed is brilliant like a shining flame. You know, in the depth of the jungle of Bangladesh, on the camps of Rohingya, in the neighborhood of Boko Haram in Nigeria, the name of America, and to be completely honest, also of France. Mm-hmm. France means also something. Right. Shines. So this is the evergreen, ever bright credit which America has.
That's very relevant to how I feel about this country as well. I came here right after college with that mindset, with that admiration, with that belief. You've been speaking out against genocide committed against ethnic and religious minorities around the world. And now you're also lending your voice for the Uyghur people who have been subject to genocide in communist China. Why do you think is the possible reason that China is engaging this kind of heinous acts on the world's watch today?
Why? Because first of all, China is a dictatorship, and dictatorship knows no limits to its power. It is a power which is never powerful enough. Number two, the very idea of faith in communist regime is unbearable, unsufferable. It can be Jewish faith, Christian faith, Muslim faith. The very idea of worshipping any creed except the creed of the Communist Party is impossible. It was like this under Stalin. Stalin in Russia really declared a total war to all believers in something else than the law of communism. It is the same in China against the majoritarily Muslim population of Xinjiang. And number three, the Uyghur of Xinjiang, like the Tibetans, like the Democrats in Hong Kong, are not sheeps.
Yeah.
They don't totally obey.
Right.
They might be the last survivors of this outdated idea, which is a free individuals. A man or a woman wanting to express his thought freely, to worship the mosque or the church, or whatever he wants. So there is a sort of sense of freedom in Xinjiang, which is again impossible to admit by the dictatorship of China. You know, same. Comparable at least. Why is Putin so keen at invading Ukraine? It's not to enlarge its space. He has enough. It's not to conquer Donetsk. It's very poor, Donetsk. No, it is because the very idea of Ukraine believing in democracy, having this dream of a transparent government, maybe corrupted, but dreaming of a regime without corruption. This dream, burning, being bright at its doors, at its gates, is impossible to admit for Putin. It has to be crushed. So same for Uyghur, for Xinjiang.
Right. There's a notion in the policy circle here in Washington in particular, when you criticize China for its behavior, domestic and international. The implied position is that you're calling for Cold War. Do you think that the U.S. or the West is engaging already in the Cold War footing situation with respect to PRC?
First of all, it is part of the DNA of a democracy to at least dream or prospect to extend itself. A democracy in only one country is a contradiction in the words. You cannot. So you cannot be a real Democrat without being an universalist. You cannot be a Democrat and thinking that the Chinese people are by nature condemned to obscurity, first of all. Second, Cold War appears to be nowadays a sort of bad word. It seems to be like a terrible and infamous ghost. Cold War was not so bad. Cold War meant prevention of hot war. Cold War was a word invented after the most hot, tragic, apocalyptic, suicidal war ever seen. Cold War came in opposition of a total war, which was Second World War and First World War in a less extent 30 years before. So Cold War is a way to stand by your principle without waging war, without declaring war. It's not so bad. Number three, what we have to choose now is probably between something like Cold War,
Right, right.
which means standing on our position, affirming our principles, extending a brotherly hand to those who all over the world believe in democracy, or shame, appeasement.
Right.
And shame and appeasement can never only be lived to entrench yourself in your border. When you appease, you encourage the bad people. You know, you cannot just, I could understand if it was possible to live in a world where if you leave Putin alone, he will be quiet with his, but it does not work like this. Mm-hmm. We know right. that if we let Putin invade Ukraine, he will try with the Baltic states. Right. He will threaten Poland and so on. China, if we don't express our concern about Uyghur, if we don't put some red lines, if we don't keep on and on repeating the names of the victims of this ethnic cleansing, if you don't have their names like candles in our brain, the power of Communist China with no limits. It will go to Taiwan. It will go to other parts of Asia, and so on. At the end of the day, the equation is, and I'm convinced of that, as long as we care of Uyghur, we discourage China of launching a terrible adventure on Taiwan. Right. If we decided to forget the Uyghur, it will send to China a sign of weakness, of appeasement, therefore of weakness, which would therefore encourage them to go to Taiwan. Do we want that? Would that be equate to a huge disorder in the world? Right. I think so.
Yeah, that's an important point, that there has not been enough deterrence measures being imposed. It has not been made it costly for them to, it goes to both Putin and Xi Jinping.
Deterrence, and as my friend Tom Kaplan often says, proportionalism are the two keys of a real policy. I'm not going to make politics. Let's forget Democrats, Republicans, and so on. What I regret is that American administration today does not seem to have even a strategy. Right. A strategy, whatever it is. I remember Kissinger. I did not like so much. As a man, he is very, very nice. But the Kissinger, when he was in charge, I was not partisan, but at least he had a strategy. He had a plan. Today we have the impression of no plan and no strategy. And this, for a democracy, is probably the worst and the most dangerous for the democracy and for the population of the democracy and for those who abroad believe in the population of this democracy.
Yeah, that's an important, takes us to the next question. There are 152 countries that are state party to the Genocide Convention. As of this week, only 8 countries, including France, have spoken out as part of their treaty obligation. Under the Article 1, state parties must call out when they see genocide and stop it and punish. Only 8 out of 152. It's very disappointing. So what is your own assessment of the European countries not fully in line with the bipartisan position that the United States government has taken on that particular treaty obligation issue? Why the countries are failing to fulfill their treaty obligation?
Appeasement, cowardness, lack of leadership, fear of China. China, look at how the international community is shy in front, for example, of Nigeria, the weak Nigerian state,
Right.
who is guilty of big crimes,
Right.
possibly genocide against Christians
Right.
in Nigeria. They don't dare. They appease. They flatter President Buhari. So, in front of China, one of the two biggest superpower in the world, they are afraid. And as long as there is not a real leadership telling them, please dare, please we can, we are strong also. The Chinese regime does not want suicide to suicide itself. As long as you don't have this leadership, you will see all these countries acting against the principle which they themselves proclaimed.
Right. What is happening in China is not Holocaust.
Is not?
Is not a Holocaust. But activists and policy analysts and academics and journalists have noted the similarities between historical atrocities of the Nazi regime being repeated today by Beijing. One of these being the Olympic Games that is set to begin next month. So 1936 Berlin Olympics is happening in the form of genocide Olympics in Beijing. Why the international community doesn't seem to learn the lesson? Why do we as human beings, as a society, as a government, country, allow history to repeat? What happened to never again?
Same, plus the lobby of sport. They want to play at any cost, whatever the cost. Plus no alternative. In 1936, by the way, there were some alternative games which were, everybody forgot that, which were organized in Barcelona, in Republican Spain.
Interesting.
Alternative games. And some countries decided not to compete in Berlin and went to Barcelona. What I would have dreamt, it would have meant, of course, breaking the rule, but sometimes the rule of sport has to be broken if the massive crimes are committed. I would have dreamt of a big democracy 6 months ago saying, okay, we organize alternative games. We understand that the sports people want to play, want to compete. Okay, we offer them a stage. Now it's too late.
Yeah.
But 6 months ago, 1 year ago, we already had the worst news from the Uyghur concentration camps, from the arbitrary detentions, of the separations of the families and so on. We could have said that. Organize, like in 1936, alternative games. But we didn't do it. In 1980, there was the same debate for the Olympic Games organized in Moscow. I remember having built at this time a committee for the boycott of the Olympic Games with some Russian dissidents. I think that Andrei Sakharov was on board, Leonid Pliush was on board. It's so difficult. Boycott is like Cold War. It is this sort of words who are good words, words of salvation, words of meaning help, words meaning protest against the worst.
Right.
But the modern times, with its appeasement mania, considers these words as unpronounceable.
Right.
It's a pity.
Right.
Boycott is a good word. When you are in front of a country who will continue to enslave, to kill, and to torture at the very moment where we will be admiring the gods of the state, they have to be boycotted, with no doubt. It's a defeat.
It is a defeat. As you may agree, that two things are particularly important for regimes like the one in Beijing. One, public condemnation, calling them out. The other is economic interest. in the upcoming Olympics, both of those aspects are involved. Because that's why we have advocated for the International Olympic Committee to relocate the Olympics to a country that does not commit a genocide, found to that heirs. And also, if that is impossible, then why not postponing it like the one in Tokyo? You know, COVID could be a good excuse. That didn't also work. So with the diplomatic boycott is the bare minimum led by the United States being announced. And the number is growing. Last week recently we had 2 more countries, including Denmark, join. People keep asking why no France in that group. What do you make of that? Why France is not joining the diplomatic boycott, at least?
I'm sorry for that. I must tell you, I'm a patriot. I love my country. I voted for Mr. Macron, and I will probably vote again for him. But for me, it's disappointing that France does not join the good club
Right.
of those who do the bare minimum. Yeah.
Right.
The diplomatic boycott is the minimorum of what can be done.
Right.
I know. But I don't lose completely hope
Right.
that France can join. Let's wait.
That's great. Now, you may have been reading in the news that I'd like to say I told you so, but it's not it's not helpful. The Chinese already saying, telling to the athletes, you need to be quiet. So
They say, I'm sorry?
they're sending a message to the athletes participating in the games that they should be staying away from a political discussion or politicizing or criticizing the government. So I don't think these governments that are sending athletes or countries realize that they're also putting the athletes to risk. Their activities, mobile phones, devices will be monitored. There's been a report that they will be asked to install certain app. And now with this contact tracing in China, it will be even more difficult, more intrusive. So I hope that the international community will realize that this is not only a morally right thing to do, but it's also for the safety, well-being of the athletes. It is something necessary. Let's talk about your book.
You know,
Yeah.
by experience,
Yeah.
I know that you should never, in such circumstance, you should never underestimate the personal consciousness of the athletes.
Right, right.
And this is impossible to control. We know that since 1936, the governments can submit themselves. You will always have one athlete to raise the hand. You will always have one athlete to insult or to provoke or to defy, let's say,
Right.
the reign of terror. I know that by experience. By feeling now, I'm ready to bet, let's say it like that. We will have some surprises.
I love your optimism.
During the games. We will have some surprises. And the Chinese power, they can confiscate the cell phone. They can enclose the athletes in their hotels. They cannot prevent their heart to beat and their head to work when they will be in front of the televisions of the whole world. So let's wait.
Thank you, thank you. I like your optimism.
Let's wait.
Jimmy Lai, a very well-known businessman and democracy activist in Hong Kong, who's now imprisoned, told the media that the CCP think that human beings shouldn't act like an animal, just eat and sleep, not worry about anything. They underestimate the decency of people, specifically in the free world. I hope to see what you were optimistic about. Anne Applebaum wrote in her Atlantic piece that your book, this book here, The Will to See, offers difficult optimism. Both the book and the film called on people not to just to see the world, but to be moved and interested by what they find there and to do something about it. how optimistic are you that the international community will find effective response to push back against authoritarianism, quietly, subtly, purposefully promoted by countries like Russia and China?
I have a reasonable optimism. My optimism consists in saying that the game is never over. My optimism consists in saying, my pessimism consists in saying that I don't believe in the natural progress. Right. This is my pessimism. I don't believe that history is led by an invisible hand which drives it automatically to a better future. My pessimism consists in saying that if we just get asleep on the back seat of the train of history and that if we believe that we will arrive in due destination, we are wrong. Right. It will not happen. Right. Now my optimism consists in believing that the opposite is false or is equally false. The worst is not certain. The world is not engaged in an inevitable decline. I don't believe in historical entropia. I don't believe more in the Oswald Spengler philosophy than in the Karl Marx progressism. My optimism consists in saying that there is no law that condemns women and men to the worst and societies to decay. That is exactly my philosophy of history. It consists in believing that a few people, few groups, sometimes individuals, can change the world. When you look at Soviet Union was apparently was strong, definitely strong. It was an army which was invulnerable. The rest of the world believed that they had the eternity for them. I remember in the 70s, the common belief that you had was that you had two forces who were there in the world, who were there forever, the Catholic Church and the Soviet Union. Right. That the two were prospecting their future at the scale of centuries. You know what happened? Right. Few individuals, the dissidents, one of them, the Pope John Paul II from Poland, few workers in the unions of the city of Gdansk did make the system collapse. This is what happened. A few individuals, plus Ronald Reagan, of course, plus America, but you know, the deep state of America, like the deep state of the European states at this time, did not believe in the regime change in Russia, in Soviet Union. They did not believe. They believed that it was made out of a stone and that this stone was unbreakable. Individuals broke it. Same can happen tomorrow to China. You don't know. China appears as a stone giant. Who knows what can happen to a stone giant? Seriously, mass does not mean anything. Hugeness of a territory means nothing. Economical power is not an argument. Dictatorship are, they can last long and they can be broken quickly because they are not adaptable.
You wrote in The Will to See that it's useful to examine the mechanism of a thirst for first-hand knowledge and previous preoccupation with the universal, which you identified as missing from difference-based or narrow community-based thinking, which influences many on the far left. This is for the people on the far left. In what ways that you see this adding to efficacy and atrocity crimes that you have witnessed in Africa, in Asia, now the one that we're talking about, the Uyghur genocide?
What horrifies me
Yeah.
is egoism. What horrifies me in politics and also in private life is selfishness.
Yeah.
And you can have the selfishness of nationalists, of the rightist nationalists,
Yeah.
and you can have the selfishness of the leftist identity politics.
Right.
It is two wings of the same selfishness.
Right.
It is two ways of turning a blind eye to a part of the reality that we prefer not to see because it is embarrassing.
Right.
And it is the way, it is a real bridge between the worst of the right and the worst of the left.
Right, right.
This way of being enclosed in one's identity, so it can be America first of Mr. Trump.
Right.
It can be the safe spaces which some woke advocates in some campuses want to preserve around themselves. The result is the same. The result is the refusal of being bothered, embarrassed by the dirty reality. A Democrat is someone who welcomes the dirty reality,
Right.
who deals with the dirtiness, who tries to clean it, of
Right,
course,
right.
who tries to repair that, but certainly not to put a border against this dirtiness.
The one common problem that we've been observing and able to even witness is that, especially in this country, the people on the far left, environmental activists, for example, presenting false choice that we should focus on saving the planet, and the genocide, fighting against genocide, is not that important. At the same time, those people also pressuring the U.S. government not to be too hard on regimes like the one in Beijing. And also in academia, the same way, the business community, the high tech, and athletes who are very vocal when it comes to some social issues, social injustice issues, racial issues in the United States, are not shown the same level of empathy, support when something's so obvious. In some instance, they play whataboutism. Just a couple of days ago, a very well-known billionaire made the word Uyghur trending in social media because of him saying that I don't care about the Uyghurs. And he was very vocal on other issues. The same thing with some athletes in NBA and others. So why do you think that is?
Because they don't believe in unity of human gender, because they don't believe that humanity is a whole, because they don't believe that that the fate of a Uyghur equates the fate of a worker of Iowa, because they believe that being a human is a local adventure and not a global adventure. It's a philosophical point.
Interesting.
About the ecologists, some of them, they are right to be worried about the climate change. This is science, this is truth. But some of them prefer to save the ocean than to save the people.
Right.
If they have to make a priority, they prefer to preserve the block of ice, the icebergs of North Pole than to save the Uyghur. This is, again, a philosophical point. They are anti-humanist.
Right.
This is anti-humanism. To prefer the nature than the culture, to prefer the stones than the humans, means being anti-humanist. And I know some people who are so eloquent and so brave when it comes to save some rare species of fishes and so dumb
Right.
when it comes to save the Christians of Nigeria or the Uyghur of China.
Right. Right.
Anti-humanism.
We
We
can-
are always driven back to philosophy, under all the petty quarrels, the pettiness of soul,
Yeah.
the bad reflex of humans, you have big philosophical basic choices.
Right. Especially now, the United States is trying to get Chinese cooperation on climate crisis. The argument is that, if we go too hard on China, they will not cooperate, as if China or Beijing does anything because of our urging or because of our kowtowing or because of our whitewashing. They do what is best for the party, what is best for the leadership. So the short answer to that is we can fight genocide and ecocide at the same time.
Of course. A human being, a citizen, a democrat is clever enough in order to count till 2.
Yeah.
1, 2, 2, 1.
Right.
We are able to do that.
I have one final question. You stated that an inner compass provokes you to action regarding the fierce indifference of fellow Westerners to atrocity crimes. What causes the possession or neglect of such an inner compass? In similar way, you stated regarding training reflexes that it is not hard to reconstruct. How can we be part of replicating your efforts?
This question of inner compass is very important.
Right.
Some have no inner compass.
Yeah.
That's true. Or the inner compass has been buried in an avalanche, in a mass, under a mass of calculations, wrong philosophical choices, and so on. But when you have your inner compass intact, when it is still working, the inner compass, you don't commit so many mistakes. And you know what is your duty. As for myself, since half a century, my inner compass did not betray me, honestly.
Very powerful. Very powerful. Thank you so much for the illuminating conversation, and I'm particularly grateful for you, for your insights and thoughts, and particularly taking time to come to visit us at Hudson Institute.
It was my pleasure.
Despite the fact that you have packed schedule, and I truly appreciate the conversation that we had today. For more information on Bernard's work, you can visit his website at bernard-henrilevy.com. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.